The neighborhood of Willow Creek was the kind of place where people measured their success by the sharpness of their hedge trimmers and the deep emerald hue of their fescue. It was a place of quiet conformity, governed by a homeowners association that operated with the efficiency of a small, petty dictatorship. At the head of that dictatorship was Brenda, though everyone called her the HOA Karen behind her back. Brenda didn't just enforce the rules, she hunted for violations with the fervor of a bloodhound. She drove a pristine, oversized white SUV that looked like it had never seen a speck of dust, and she used it as a mobile command center to terrorize the residents. I was her favorite target. My name is Arthur, a retired mechanical engineer who just wanted to be left alone to tinker in my garage and grow my prize-winning hydrangeas. But my house sat on a sharp corner of the main cul-de-sac, and Brenda had developed a nasty habit. Every time she did her patrol, she would cut the corner of my property. It started small, just a tire width over the curb, but as the months went by, her entitlement grew. She began driving 2 wheels deep into my grass, leaving twin muddy gouges that tore through my meticulously maintained lawn. "Brenda, you're killing the grass," I told her one Tuesday morning, standing on my porch with a mug of lukewarm coffee. She didn't even roll down the window all the way, just a sliver to let her shrill voice out. "It's a tight turn, Arthur. If you'd trim those bushes back, I wouldn't have to swing so wide. Consider this a verbal warning for overhanging foliage." She then gassed the engine, kicking up a spray of dirt and sod onto my driveway before speeding off. The breaking point. The conflict escalated over the summer. I tried everything. I put up small decorative stakes. Brenda drove over them, claiming they were a safety hazard for pedestrians. I placed large river rocks along the edge. The HOA sent me a fine for unauthorized landscaping features. The breaking point came in August. I had just spent 3 days reseeding and leveling the corner. I had put up a small, polite sign, "Please keep off the grass." That afternoon, I watched from my living room window as Brenda's white SUV rounded the corner. She didn't just cut the turn, she drove directly over the sign, crushing it into the mud, and stayed on my lawn for a full 20 feet before hopping back onto the asphalt. She even slowed down to look at my front door, a smug grin visible through the tinted glass. I didn't yell, I didn't go outside. I sat in my armchair, feeling the cold, calculated stillness of a man who had spent 40 years designing complex machinery. I realized that as long as the consequences were merely aesthetic, Brenda wouldn't stop. She viewed my lawn as her territory. It was time to change the geography of the battlefield. The plan. I spent the next week in my garage. My neighbor, Dave, a younger guy who hated Brenda just as much as I did, stopped by when he heard the sound of a power drill and the smell of soldering iron. "What are you building, Art? A new birdhouse?" Dave asked, leaning against the workbench. "I'm planting mines," I said, my voice flat. Dave's eyes went wide. Like the kind that go boom, Arthur, that's a felony." I looked up and offered a dry, mischievous smile. "Not those kinds of mines. I'm an engineer, Dave. I believe in non-lethal deterrence with maximum psychological impact." I showed him the prototype. It was a pressure-sensitive canister buried in a housing made of PVC pipe. When a weight exceeding 4,000 pounds, the approximate weight of a luxury SUV, pressed down on the lid, a spring-loaded piston would fire. "What's inside?" Dave asked, leaning in. "A proprietary blend," I whispered. "Extremely high-staining organic beet juice, concentrated liquid skunk scent, and a gallon of industrial-strength glitter. It won't hurt the car's mechanics, but it will ruin its soul." Dave started to laugh. It was a deep, belly-aching laugh. "You're a madman. When do they go in?" "Tonight." The installation. Under the cover of darkness, I went to work. I dug 3 holes along the curve of the lawn, precisely where Brenda's tire tracks were deepest. I bypassed the HOA's rule against above-ground structures by burying everything 6 inches deep. I topped the canisters with a thin layer of sod that I had carefully grafted to look undisturbed. I calibrated the pressure plates. A human walking over them wouldn't trigger a thing, even a lawnmower would pass safely. But the concentrated weight of a 4-ton vehicle, that would trigger the mines with surgical precision. I went to bed that night feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The outcome. The next morning was a Saturday. Saturday was Brenda's grand inspection day, where she drove around with a clipboard to find reasons to fine people for having their trash cans out 3 minutes too long. I sat on my porch in a rocking chair, reading a book I wasn't actually focusing on. Dave was across the street washing his car with suspicious intensity, clearly waiting for the show. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the white SUV appeared at the top of the hill. Brenda was moving slowly, her eyes darting left and right looking for prey. As she approached my corner, she didn't even hesitate. She veered right, aiming her front tires directly for the fresh sod. Thump! The front tire hit the first mine. There was no explosion, but there was a distinct, pressurized PSSSSSS pop. A geyser of deep, blood-red beet juice and neon-pink glitter erupted from the ground, coating the entire right side of the white SUV. It looked like the car had just gone through a blender with a disco ball. Brenda slammed on the brakes, which was her second mistake. By stopping, she put the full weight of the rear tire directly onto the second mine. Pop FZZZT. This time, the skunk scent component joined the party. A cloud of yellowish mist enveloped the vehicle, followed by another massive spray of glitter. The scent hit me even from the porch. It was a smell so foul it could peel paint off a barn. Brenda screamed. I could hear it through her closed windows. She panicked and tried to floor it to get off the lawn, which caused her front tire to hit the third and final mine. This one was the grand finale. I had loaded it with a mixture of biodegradable blue dye and several thousand tiny adhesive-backed sequins. The spray caught the windshield, the grille, and the air intake vents for the AC. The SUV bucked and finally rolled back onto the street, coming to a halt in the center of the cul-de-sac. The aftermath. The scene was a masterpiece of suburban chaos. The once pristine white SUV now looked like a tie-dyed nightmare that had lost a fight with a craft store. Brenda threw open her door and stepped out, gasping for air. The smell was the first thing that hit her. She turned a shade of pale green that almost matched my lawn. "Arthur!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "What did you do? Look at my car, you've ruined it." I stood up slowly, marking my page in the book. I walked down to the edge of my lawn, being careful to stay on the sidewalk. Dave had stopped washing his car and was now openly filming the whole thing on his phone, doubled over with silent laughter. "Is there a problem, Brenda?" I asked, my voice dripping with faux concern. "You put something in the ground, it exploded. This is vandalism. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "But you might want to explain to them why you were driving 4 feet onto my private property to trigger a ground-based irrigation event." The police arrived 20 minutes later. Officer Miller, a local who had dealt with Brenda's noise complaints about neighborhood kids playing tag, surveyed the scene. He looked at the red and blue streaked SUV, the glitter shimmering in the sunlight, and the faint, unmistakable odor of skunk. He looked at the tire tracks, deep, muddy ruts clearly leading from the road deep into my lawn. Then he looked at me. "Arthur," Miller said, trying desperately to keep a straight face, "what happened here?" "Well, officer, I've been having a lot of trouble with pests digging in my lawn," I said. "I installed some organic deterrents. They're perfectly legal, non-toxic, biodegradable, and completely safe for humans and animals. They only trigger under extreme pressure." Miller walked over to the SUV. He poked a finger into the blue goo and the glitter. "For tracking the pests," I explained, "so I know where they go." Brenda was vibrating with rage. "He did this on purpose. Look at my car, the smell won't come out." I turned on the AC and it blew glitter into the upholstery. Officer Miller sighed and pulled out his notepad. "Well, Brenda, looking at these tracks, you were pretty far off the road. In fact, you're trespassing on private property. If Arthur wants to file a claim for the damage to his turf, he's well within his rights." Brenda's jaw dropped. "What about my car?" "I'd suggest a car wash," Miller said, "and maybe staying on the asphalt. The road is for driving, Brenda. The lawn is for looking at." The new normal. The fallout was glorious. The skunk scent, designed to be persistent, lingered in Brenda's SUV for weeks. No matter how many times she detailed it, a faint whiff of abandoned trash fire would waft through the vents every time she turned on the heat. The glitter, as anyone who has ever used it knows, is the herpes of the craft world. It is forever. Months later, she would still show up to HOA meetings with a single pink sequin stuck to her forehead. The HOA tried to find me, of course, but I showed up to the meeting with a lawyer friend of mine and a printed copy of the bylaws. There is no rule against underground liquid distribution systems, my lawyer pointed out. Furthermore, if the HOA pursues this, we will countersue for the repeated, documented destruction of private property by a board member. They backed down. Brenda still drives around the neighborhood, but she's different now. When she approaches my corner, she slows down to a crawl. She stays so far toward the center of the road that she almost hits the mailbox on the opposite side. I've since repaired the lawn. The grass is thicker and greener than ever, nourished by the beet juice and the satisfaction of a plan well executed. Every now and then, when I'm out watering my hydrangeas, Brenda will drive by. She doesn't look at me anymore. She keeps her eyes fixed straight ahead, her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. But sometimes, in the right light, I see a stray blue sequin catch the sun on her door handle. It's a reminder that some lessons are best taught through experience. I haven't had a single tire track on my grass since that day. It turns out that a Karen can be redirected, you just have to make sure the path of least resistance doesn't involve your lawn. I went back into my garage that evening and started sketching a new design. This one involved a motion-activated sprinkler loaded with diluted neon orange hair dye, just in case the neighbors' dog-walking habits didn't improve. But for now, the neighborhood was quiet, the mines were dormant, but the legend remained, and my lawn, it was perfect.